Right, you guys, here's another Q&A. Like I said, you guys keep coming with these questions. I'm just going to keep doing these Q&As on a regular basis. Let's get straight to it. So Cutterwalks wants to know, why was the NR disbanded? The NR was disbanded for two reasons. The primary purpose for the disbandment of the NR is due to the NR's own internal discord and dissidence. As the NR grew in numbers and became a formidable force within its own right, some of the more influential NR members began using their influence to champion a resistance. Little brother basically grew up and no longer wanted to listen to big brother. It started with a handful of NR members like Pee Wee from Gilroy, DK from Salinas, Jasper from Soledad, and others who began propagating their calls for independence. They felt that they should no longer have to conform or adhere to the NF's dictates or direction based on the fact that they had established themselves as their own entity. But this was based more on personal motives to take over and govern the movement themselves than it was about any real calls for independence. In 94 and 95, these rogue NR members were initially weeded out and targeted for their traitorous and subversive actions. However, by the time the NF pursued corrective action and attempted to rid this problem, it was too late. Too many NR members had been poisoned and corrupted, which resulted in the loss of order and equilibrium. So in 97-98, after all attempts to restore order had failed, the NF decided that the only viable course of action left to take was to pull the plug and disband the entire movement. We felt like this would enable us to unify the Norteño following, and that would also allow us to regain control over the whole movement. The other reason why disbandment seemed like a viable countermeasure is because at that time, CDCR was locking up and validating anyone identified as being a member of the NR under what was described as a broken and unjust validation system. By disbanding and dismantling the NR, it was believed that this would result in skirting the validation process and that CDCR would no longer be justified in subjecting these non-affiliated Northerners to this flawed policy. But in all actuality, the NR was never officially disbanded. The movement was just placed on hibernation mode for a couple years. Those who were made NR members were directed to start identifying themselves as Norteños, and those that were not NR members were directed to start identifying themselves as Northerners. So a distinction was made for our own identification purposes, and technically, the only effectuation that came out of this was a change in terminology or the designation of new titles. Sandoval Mesquita wants to know, I wanted to ask you if you've seen that one documentary of Operation Black Widow, where that guy Little Mondo killed that one guy in the bar. Who was that guy he killed, and who was the guy who comes out at the end that says, it did have an impact on the familia, but it's just a setback? Yes, I seen the documentary you inquired about. That's old news. Although I wasn't a defendant in that case, I was involved with a lot of people who were. To be honest with you, I was actually expecting to be indicted in that case, but I guess it just wasn't my time yet. The bar you mentioned was Cap Saloon in Salinas. The youngster that got caught up for that shooting was Armando Tizol Frias, and the guy that died was Raymond Sanchez. There was another guy with Sanchez named Joe Criminal Cantu, who was also shot in the neck. After Mondo shot Sanchez and was running towards the door, his homeboy Criminal was coming in, so Mondo shot him too. In that documentary you mentioned, Blood In, Blood Out, the guy who identified himself as Casper was really Daniel Lizard Hernandez. He's the one that made the comment you asked about, and he's also the federal operative that helped the feds put that whole case together. So Big Moose wants to know, how much influence does the BGF have today among the black inmates? Do they still recruit? What was the situation with Yogi when he got killed? It's crazy to think it was allowed to happen and his death hasn't been avenged. Agreed. Yeah, I couldn't understand why nothing was done about it either. This guy was an integral part of the BGF's history and had made the ultimate sacrifice, but yet he was allowed to be victimized without any kind of retaliation. After looking more into this, I got word from a few people that I still talk to that Yogi was supposedly cell soldiering and disrespecting some of the white dudes that were there with him in ADSEG. This supposedly happened prior to him getting out and coming back out to the main line, and then it kind of spilled over into the yard. But regardless to whether or not this was true, right or wrong, they still shouldn't have allowed something like that to happen without retaliating. To make matters worse, this wasn't just perpetrated by the whites, they were assisted by the Southsiders. I'm not saying nothing bad about the Southsiders, but as far as prison politics, how do you justify this? While Yogi was being held down and stabbed to death, the Southsiders set up a scrimmage so that nobody else could get involved or come to his assistance. As far as the BGF still having influence and whether or not they still recruit, yes, they're still active, and yes, they still recruit new members. But as Gary Stevenson said in the comments, they're more active in some of the eastern states like Baltimore, Chicago, Maryland, etc., etc. They still have a presence in California, but they're not as strong or influential as they were in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So Bear Emma wants to know who approves or who allows to tattoo NF, MA, AB, BGF after being made. The member chooses where he wants it. Man, to be honest with you, there really isn't any policies on the books that regulate where, what, or who gets these type of tattoos. It's pretty much left up to the members themselves. The only obvious policy that you can't get a tattoo of is the group symbol or signia if you're not a member. Misrepresentation will get you hurt or killed. The smart ones don't get any tattoos identifying their affiliations because it doesn't do anything but bring you a lot of negative attention. At first, you might feel a sense of pride for getting it, and you might relish in the attention you get out on the streets. But then there's going to come a point when that attention is going to work against you. I was one of those big dummies that wanted everybody and their mother to see what I was affiliated with, and I liked the attention because I was young and was still intrigued by the lifestyle. But later on, getting Nuestra Familia blasted on the back of my head made me a big target for law enforcement, and it put me on their radar. Not only that, but then when I would end up getting caught up, it worked against me when they paraded me into the courtroom in front of a jury. The jury looked at me like I was a monster, and I don't think the impression ever worked in my favor. So Gabe Hernandez wants to know, can you elaborate on Fidel de la Riva? Seeing him on the show Lockup as a kid, stating he was a high-ranking general. Fidel Boxer de la Riva from Selma was not a high-ranking general. I was with this brother in Pelican Bay SHU in 1998. We were housed in C11 B-Pod for about a year. I will say this, Boxer was involved in our leadership circle, but he was far from being a general, not even close. He's a good dude and there's no issue between us, so I don't want to say anything that can be construed as an attack on his character, but I will say this. Beware of these dudes that come out on those documentaries like Lockup and Gangland, because sometimes these dudes embellish some of the facts and talk themselves up knowing that they're on TV. What I've noticed about a lot of these dudes that either get dropped out, walked out, kicked out, stabbed out, knocked out, or beat out is that they often claim the fame and say that they were something that they weren't. Epi Cortina is another one. Instead of just getting up there and telling their true story, that they were just a soldier or an up-and-coming new member, everybody wants to claim that they were running the whole Northern California, or that they were lieutenants, captains, commanders, or five-star generals. I guess it hurts their ego to sometimes admit that they never measured up to nothing more than an average member, or that they never made it up that organizational ladder. But damn, everybody can't be a general. It's okay to tell the truth. So Fernando Califas wants to know, look, I didn't put your whole comment in here because it was too long. Your full question is not included, only included portions. It's crazy how Northerners have to learn the bonds, history, and do essays to break them down, thinking they're learning something righteous and meaningful, only to learn that none of that stuff actually applies when money or politics come into play. Because I chose to call someone out on some bullshit pertaining to money and what was right, I got treated like shit and learned the true meaning of expendability. These books helped me. Thanks for giving me the real enlightenment that exposed the old for what it really is. Like I said, Fernando, I didn't include your entire statement because it was a little lengthy, but I did include some of the more important points you made and kind of consolidated it for you. Foremost, you're welcome, brother. I'm glad I was able to help you. That's what it's all about for me. And if somehow I help you take them blinders off, then that's even better. But just to be clear, so others know, I'm not advocating anyone to drop out, and I've never said that there's anything cool about snitching. If that's what anyone thinks I'm doing or saying, then they've seriously misread me and what I'm about. I encourage people to do what they want to do, and it's not my place to tell anyone who or what they should get involved in. However, what I am about is giving you all the true and correct information about what I was involved in, if that's what you're thinking about doing. I'll tell you exactly what you're signing up for, what's involved, what's going to happen, and what eventually happens to most people. But what you ultimately decide to do with that information, or what you decide in the end, is strictly and solely up to you. I would hope that you're smart enough to capitalize off my mistakes and see it for what it really is. But if you still choose to get involved at the end of the day, then that's your choice and your choice alone. In your case, I'm glad I was able to pass on the enlightenment that you needed in order to make sure that you didn't become just another victim. If I see someone drowning, I'd rather do whatever I can to pull them out instead of just standing there and watching them go under. So Jay Aviles wants to know, did you do time with Robert Juarito Gratton? Are you doing a profile on him? To me, it seemed like he was only just a political person, not someone who wanted to put work in. To be honest with you, I wasn't planning on doing a profile on him, as I just read the dude's whole book. That was the profile right there. Beyond that, there's really not a whole lot more to say about him. As far as doing time with him, no, I've never been in the same block or pod as him. We were in the shoe in Pelican Bay at the same time, but we never ran into each other up there. The only other thing I could tell you is that he wasn't really what I would call an honest member. What I mean by that is this: some of us end up becoming members of the familia because we were striving for it. We spent years making sacrifices, and because through our own achievements became true NF prospects. Juarito's status was given to him because of opportunity. Everything was given to him, and he became who he was because just by mere chance, he ended up being housed right next door to Cuete. Had that not happened, he probably would have still been an NR member, and he might even still be alive today. He was never an up-and-coming household name in the Bay. I had never even heard about him until he cut the book, and only after the Operation Black Widow case. I hope this helps. So Francisco Daniel wants to know, can you talk more about Diablo? I heard of him and heard 2 interviews he gave on another YouTube channel. Did you know him personally? Maybe you missed this, but yes, I knew him personally, and I already talked about this in a prior Q&A. Dimas Diablo de Leon from Tracy is a good dude, and I was housed with him in the shoe in Pelican Bay back in early 1999. We were in the same pod in C2 for about 8 or 9 months. At that time, he was housed with Rudy from Visalia, and I was celled up with Big Rock from Salinas. I don't have nothing negative to say about him, and he's a good dude. But he's another one that people have said they heard he was a high-ranking general or captain. I don't know if people assume this, if they heard it from somewhere else, or if these guys gave this impression during these interviews. But he was not a high-ranking NF member. Although I'm aware of the 2 interviews you mentioned, I never listened to them, so I don't know what he represented or what kind of perception he led others to believe about himself. So Misery wants to know, or made a comment on my book and stated it rivals Renee's book, The Black Hand. Also commented on the namesake. Like I said above, you made more of a comment than you did asking a question, but yet I still wanted to respond in brief anyway. I appreciate the positive compliments you gave me in regards to my book being a page turner. I appreciate that, and I'm glad it's been able to keep your attention. As far as the comparison you made, I'll take that as a compliment as well. But I do want to say this. I read Renee's book myself, and I agree that it was a very good book. But if I had any criticism at all, it would be my own disappointment due to Renee not writing it directly from his own hand. He used Chris Blatchford as a ghostwriter. And when you do that, I just think it takes away a little bit of the book's authenticity. I'm sure we've all heard Renee speak. He talks like a damn polished professor. So we all know he didn't write the book because he couldn't do it himself. Maybe he just didn't want to invest the time, because trust me, it does take a lot of work. But I just think that it would have been fire if he would have did it independently the same way I did. As far as the namesake, yeah, what a coincidence, right? So it's a cold world. G wants to know, can you go into details about the situations that happened the first time you were in PC to get out of there? I'll do my best without incriminating myself. No, seriously, I'll speak in general terms, because some of the things I did not only put me in legal jeopardy, but some of the COs that are still employed there at the jail can still be pursued by internal affairs. What I did, with the assistance and coordination of another NF member who was across the hall from me on an active tier, is I basically started spearing any other inmate who tried to walk past my cell. After dialoguing with this individual, we concluded that the only way I was going to get myself removed from that environment was to start spearing people, and that from that day forward, I was just going to keep it in motion. The first individual that I got didn't say nothing at first and just basically took it. The second person I targeted not only told on me, but he also told on the CO who was escorting him, because the CO never reported the incident. Neither did the first, as they didn't want to get involved and had no interest in being dragged into court. After I got told on, classification and the welcoming squad came to my cell and told me that they were moving me to an observation cell. They said they couldn't have me there hurting any more people and that they had to move me. To my right, outside of my sight, was about 20 officers in full riot gear ready to extract me. At first, I didn't know until one of the classification reps told me that I was moving and wanted to know if I was going to give them any problems during the move. I responded by saying, my issue ain't with you guys. You already know what the problem is. I don't have a problem moving, but I'm telling you right now, I'm not wearing that brown top. And if you guys try forcing the issue, then I'm ready to go the distance. The brown top represented PC, and I refused to wear that top. This is when I found out that the whole hallway was lined with COs in riot gear. The classification rep turned toward his right and said, Sarge, you don't want to wear the top. Do you have a problem walking him over there in a t-shirt? Needless to say, they moved me without incident, and 10 days later, I was moved back to a double red max tier where the other NF member was housed. I mentioned this in my last Q&A, but the inserted newspaper articles above is another incident they tried to say I was involved in. The references made about the high-ranking gang member were references that were made about me. Northern Cali wants to know, do active Norteños in the SF mission 415 still embrace you, or is it funk on sight? Yeah, I get nothing but love from my hood, man. Those that truly know me and who were bred and raised with me have never stopped loving and respecting me. That's not to say that there's those who obviously wish it never would have happened and that I didn't have to go through what I did, but real loyalty goes deeper than that. Right or wrong, it's hard to turn your back on someone who you know is a hitter, someone who you know would always have your back regardless of the circumstances, and someone who you just consider to be a good dude. I know this sounds hypocritical, and to some of you it probably flies in the face of some of the street codes, but I'm just keeping it real with you. I even know cats like that myself. Short of molesting a child or catching some type of weirdo crime, there's not too much they could do that would cause me to turn my back on them. I might get disappointed about something, but these are dudes I consider to be blood brothers. So it's a cold world. G wants to know, are Northerners, NF members allowed to try and escape from either state or federal prison? Come on, man. Are you serious? This has got to be the easiest question I had to answer tonight. Of course they're allowed to escape. Shit, why wouldn't they? Seriously, why wouldn't they be? I mean, can you really think of a logical reason why there would be a rule prohibiting them from cutting tread? If there was one, that's definitely one of them rules made to be broken. Think about all those cats that have life. We bring them into the organization and then we send them a set of our household policies, telling them that under no condition are they to try, attempt, plan, or make any effort to escape. To do so will result in serious repercussions. So Snake Toms wants to know, didn't know you released a second book, was only aware of the first one. What's the name of the second book and where can I find it? So several of you have alluded to a rumor regarding me releasing my second book. Let me just be clear about this right now so there's no more misconceptions. I am working on the second book. I was trying to finish it so that I could have released it before the end of 2020, but that obviously didn't happen. Just so you guys know, writing a damn book takes forever. It's a lot of work and it takes a lot longer than you think. Trust me on that. It took me 5 years to write my first book, and that's not including my own editing. I'm gonna be honest with you guys. I'm probably about 2/3 done with my book, but I should have it finished no later than August or September of this year. If I wasn't doing this YouTube stuff, I'd be done sooner, but that ain't gonna happen. I'll keep you guys posted as I progress, but the second book is gonna have the same cover and the same title. The only difference is gonna be the subtitle. So Abel Williams wants to know what happened to Big Smiley and the rest of the NF generals from the state, because I think they should have been cut them off. The NF generals and the feds, shipmen, running everything, the money did everything. And if they need to help their people out, but they did, GDs and the Bloods and Crips do the same thing. Hey, you guys, when I get some of these comments, I type them out exactly how you guys write them. So do your own check, proofread your own stuff. Because sometimes I think I know what you're trying to ask, but I can't be positive. So this is one of those cases right here. Bear with me, but I hope I understood you right. I typed your question out verbatim, exactly how you typed it, but I think there's some typos. At any rate, I think I understood what you were trying to ask. As far as Big Smiley and where he's at, unless he just recently moved, he's still in the Bay. After he got into that power struggle with Pantera, they were both excommunicated and expelled from the organization. An attempt was made on Big Smiley's life. However, it ended up being a failure. The former leadership for the state is now the leadership for the federal prison system, and the state has reorganized itself under a new appointed leadership. But I agree, they should have been forced to relinquish their positions as soon as they were indicted, and they should have never been allowed to stay in these positions after they left the Bay. Per NF law, that some of them actually helped draft up, Pelican Bay is and always will be HQ, headquarters. And whenever leadership becomes incommunicado or placed in a position that hinders or adversely affects them from doing their job, they are mandated to pass down their positions to the next candidate in the rotation system. These guys knew what was required of them when they were all indicted and moved to the Santa Rita County Jail. But their greed and their proclivity for money wouldn't allow it. Giving up those positions meant that they would be giving up all that money. So Anthony Deal wants to know, what's up with the video on how you aren't replying to any of my questions? I've asked on several occasions over numerous videos on your platform. I doubt you haven't seen them. Let me know something. Oh my God. Okay, so look, you're kidding, right? So you want me to do a video on why I haven't responded to any of your questions? That ain't gonna happen. But let me just say this. I try to respond to as many questions that you guys drop in the comments as I possibly can. There's no favoritism. I don't purposely skip over someone, nor do I keep track for the purpose of avoiding them. The fact that I'm even responding to this comment should be indicative that I really don't have an interest in what or who I respond to. I don't know what else to say other than keep submitting your questions, but try not to take it personal if you're not selected. So iChit in my hand wants to know, can we get a video on Cap Saloon? That's in motion. I'll be working on something in regards to that Cap shooting and some other Salinas related content within the next week or two. So Jay Davis wants to know, or he wants to make a comment. I have never heard of any BGF, Crips, Bloods, or any black prison gangs really do anything to the AB. All I ever hear is blacks being taken off on. Always seems like the black car and Cali prisons are soft. What's your take? I don't know if I go as far as saying they're soft, but I will say this. They definitely haven't been the aggressor, and they definitely haven't been pushing as hard of a line that I would expect them to push. In all fairness to them, I think a lot of this is attributed to any real lack of order or an established leadership structure. I've spoken about this in several of my Q&As in the past, and in some of these stories that I put out. Back in the 70s and even into the 80s, they had a fierce reputation within the California prison system and were known for putting in a lot of work on the administration. The George Jackson spill I just put out is proof of this. They've always been more geared towards the political prisoner movement and their disdain for the administration. But when it comes to prison politics, things have been a little sketchy. This is how I see it. They're more than capable of holding their own, and they're definitely a force to be reckoned with, but only after being pushed into a corner. And I hope that nobody takes offense to this, but the truth and the facts are in the history. I think their biggest downfall is that they're so divided, it works against them. If they banded together and started striving for a common purpose, then they would be a lot stronger. One of the other major setbacks that they've been plagued with is the mentality of the younger generation. They refuse to conform and acknowledge any form of authority. They look at leadership as dictatorship. You can't tell me shit. I run my own program and I'm not about to be dictated. That's all good, but in the big scheme of things, and when it comes to the dynamics of gangs, unity, order, and conforming to authority is imperative. How can you maintain any real order and equilibrium otherwise? You can't, especially if you're divided. Hugo Yogi Pinell is a prime example. How can they justify allowing one of their legendary leaders to be pincushioned and not retaliate? That's despicable to say the least. I can't even wrap my head around that. Something like that would be analogous to the NF allowing one of their generals to be killed by one of its adversaries and then do nothing about it. I used to be a big advocate for the alliance we had with the African brothers, not only because I felt like a lot of them were some solid dudes, but also because I grew up with a lot of them in the city and I just had a lot of history with them. But even I felt a strong sense of disappointment from them when they chose to forge a peace treaty with our common enemy right in the middle of the Corcoran Shoe Wars. I knew that this was attributed to their leadership at the time, but unfortunately, something like that has an impact, and it's felt all the way down the ranks. Again, if the Northern Blacks, the Crips, and the Bloods came together in unison and reestablished themselves under a strong leadership structure, they'd be strong and they would emerge as one of the more dominant forces within the California prison system. When everyone's divided and broken up, it makes them weaker and a lot more vulnerable. If an enemy hits one of them and they're of the mindset of, that's on them, as long as they don't fuck with me, I ain't tripping, then that clearly exposes how feeble they are. If they're united and they all move as one, then they're gonna act as one and strike back with force. The days of just defending yourselves when you have to, or just fighting back because you've been pushed into a corner, have got to go. They need to get back to the mindset of the 70s and 80s of identifying targets and threats and then being the ones to start making the hits. They've got to start kicking it off and bringing it to their enemies instead of just waiting for the funk to come to them. Like I said, I hope nobody takes offense to this, as it's just my opinion and the way I see things. Make no mistake about it, I've got nothing but love and respect for the African brothers, and those that know me would never question this. So Paul Acosta Jr. wants to know, I was passing through Chino prison, CIM, when they first started that 50-50 yard merge. And I got to talk to an inmate worker that stayed on that yard when they opened the 50-50 yard up. He stated that there was not one active that took off on anyone. You know what, brother? I'm glad you stopped through and dropped that comment. I've elaborated on this new policy that CDCR started implementing before COVID broke, and it seems to be a sore issue for some cats that are still active. Now I understand why. I guess it hurts to know that a lot of these guys who claim to be active ain't following suit and are not doing what they're supposed to. I'm only the messenger, the one passing this information on, but yet it's almost like they get mad at me for putting this out there. I don't have a vested interest either way. I don't give a fuck. If they were serving these DOs and handing them their asses, then I would put it out there and let it be known. But unfortunately, that's just not what's happening. I've talked to several dudes that are on these SMYs, and they've all told me that they were out there on the yard when active cats came out there and none of them did anything. Instead, they decided to program and just said, fuck it. I'm telling you, man, it's a dying breed. I think some of these dudes are going out there to some of these yards that are thick with these DOs. And then they're like, man, fuck that. I'm just going to kick back and program. Right now, COVID is probably the best thing that happened to them because due to the COVID pandemic, they stopped all movement and haven't been moving anyone. I'll update you guys when I get more info on this. But man, some people are saying it ain't looking good for the home team. This concludes this Q&A for now. But like I've been saying, as long as you guys continue submitting your questions, I'm just going to continue doing these Q&As on a regular basis.